Welcome to the Movement Podcast. This show is all about movement, giving you a better idea of how you can optimize the human body to be the best it can be.
So James, so happy to have you on with us today. You and I look back when I was thinking about doing this podcast, I think it was probably 7 or 8 years ago. I first met you in London, of all places, where you were coming over and attending one of the workshops. And that's usually how we forge some of these relationships. We see each other and bond over a beer or two or 3 or 5 or whatever it is. And I think that's where you and I started chatting. And, I know you're doing some pretty interesting things now with, kind of everything you've learned over the number of years. So without taking too much more time, James, kind of give us the snapshot of kind of your journey over the last number of years, kind of where we started talking and chatting to what you're doing now.
Yeah, it's crazy. I forgot about that. It was in the Hilton in London at Heathrow with Peter Lakatosh. He was there as well, wasn't he? And he introduced me to you for the very first time. But it was way before then with FMS. Like Brett Jones introduced me to the world of FMS through the old school CK FMS course in the mid 2000s, I think it was, with the old RKC. So it's been a long old journey. So like my journey with fitness and FMS is quite different. Like I was the athlete. Cricket was my main sport, if anyone knows what that is. That was my main sport growing up and everything here. But then I fell into the world of police. I was in the police for a long time. And then just injuries and setbacks for me personally when I was in the police led me to the world of FMS. It actually led me to the kettlebell, which then led me to the FMS. And after years of like serious back pain and trying to figure things out on my own, I ended up like finally fixing my back. And guess what the problem was? It was shoulder mobility and active straight leg raise. It was those little things that started the whole ball rolling for me, that I transitioned from this police officer in London working in the Met to like world of personal training, then strength coach and all those sort of things. So it's funny. It's actually really humbling and like being nice, so nice to be on here with you guys today, because you have so much influence on my career from back in the day and getting me out of pain. It's kind of nice to be here with you guys today. So even before like 7, 8, 9, how many years ago it was when we first met, Lee, your influence and Gray's influence on me was way before then, from back in the 2000s. So I wholeheartedly thank you for all that and appreciate all the work you've done.
Your story, and we've discussed it at length a few different times, has 3 key words in it. And so much of the personal growth I've gone through, our instructors, some of the people we've met, has pain, function, and exercise. And right now, I think you've provided a really, a way to access fundamentals of strength, wellness, health, movement through a non-personal relationship, even though it might be personal with your resources, your website and stuff like that. And cleaning up the message, I think, still needs a human element, but cleaning up the message in, you had pain, you sought functional exercise in kettlebells, but I think you realized a lot of the same things a lot of people in kettlebells realize. This does make a lot more sense. And if I'd been doing this all along, I wouldn't be here. But just doing this alone still is not getting me well. So you adopted kettlebells and you were never going to look back, but you also need to admit, I'm not as flexible as Pavel, and I can't stick that swing or snatch as good as Brett Jones. And therefore, do I need to practice kettlebells more or use what kettlebells showed me, good functional meal, and I'm not bringing enough James Breese to this meal. So you got to go back. And that's where Brett and I said, I can unpack the Turkish getup and give you almost every corrective that you would need for the FMS. But the weight of the kettlebell is negotiable, and that hurts your pride sometimes. And it hurt mine when I first did it. But, on the internet right now, people are going to find out about function and exercise through their questions about pain. Just adopting functional exercise is often not enough. Just like shopping at Whole Foods is often not enough if you're vitamin D deficient to really hard places. So transitioning back out of correctives into function, or picking the correctives you're going to need to be the rest of your life, are some of the decisions I think you have clarified for people and you help them make. But I like to word clear pain and make sure we're attacking it the right way. I like to make sure that you don't put all the burden of your problem on an exercise. There's self-care, there's lifestyle, there's awareness. And I really like the way you bring some of those awareness of movement ability but we got to divorce sometimes our functional appraisal from a specific exercise, because a lot of exercises are good. Depends on who, depends on when, depends on why. So I love the way that we can navigate questions about pain back toward function, and even you're not even functional yet, but let's get you functional. How much pain do we still have now? Oh, not much. Good. If we still have pain, there's other ways to get to that.
Well, James, my question to you to kind of get this, really dive a little bit deeper into you and what you've been doing. What made you transition from being a police officer to what you're doing now? What was that light bulb to say, hey, I'm a police officer. I love serving people, doing that. It sounded like you had some pain. You gravitated to kettlebell, FMS, but I mean, you're a strength coach now. So what made that kind of decision? What was part of that decision making?
Well, it was interesting. Back in the mid 2000s, when everything was here, like the police force in London, or police service as they now call it in London, was very different. There was a lot more money pre the 2007, 2008 crash. There was a lot of money, a lot of things being able to be done there. Obviously, those cutbacks came in, and that did have an impact into what I did. But it was more of like, if I go back to that point, that there was one specific point where I made that change, and I realized I can't do what I'm doing. What I'm doing now has got to change. Otherwise, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again. And I've gone through this 2-3 year cycle, which I can look back on now and go, right, do you know what? It was more of a lifestyle choice in the way my life was back then, because as a police officer, you're wearing a lot of heavy kit all day, 20, 25 pounds most of the day, sitting down for long periods of time as well. And I look back, it's actually more the lifestyle issues that was going around it. And I wasn't doing the corrections to fix it. That was the root source, which I now know through all the experience I've had. But it was more of a case of like, there was lots of changes in the police at the time, for good, for bad, and whatever it was. But it was as I discovered how I could help me fix myself. And it was a moment in the police where I was in a big, I'll be honest, I was in the middle of a fight, and my back went to complete spasm. It left me helpless on the floor. And I had to get my colleagues to come around to come in to protect me, because my back had completely gone into spasm. It had gone completely out. And that was the moment I realized I got to do something different about it. So by doing that and following into the world of like seeing other officers and other police officers in the same boat as me, they all had back planes, like knee problems, hip problems, all these things. And I was figuring out this new world. And the more I learned, the more the conversation started with these guys, the more I started training them, that the more these conversations happened outside of the police force as well. Their families, their friends, they came. And I realized not many people know this message around the kettlebell movement, good quality strength training. And I'll put this down to this, is that I think back then particularly, it's improved a lot ever since then, that I learned all my strength training from the United States. That's a really important thing. I had to come to the States and to learn and understand what strength training really was, because growing up in the UK, you don't have that. There's no weight rooms. Like, I grew up in the hills and the mountains of Wales. That was my gym, essentially. It wasn't a weight room. I didn't understand what barbell training really was until I was 20, 21 years old. And it's a massive difference. And I realized that across the board, there was this lack of understanding and education. And that was something coming from a family of teachers as well. And I wanted to share this with them and make a difference with them. And the more people that started helping and having an impact on them, just little things, and like some of the shoulder mobility drills I learned in some of the original Secrets of the Shoulder DVDs, some of the get up stuff, and the profound impact it had on those guys. That's what led me to this, realizing actually there's more to this, and actually helping more people across the world. And the more I did that, the more people in the UK came to me, and it was like, it just kind of exploded from there, really. So it was more of a helping other people to avoid the same mistakes that I was making or had made, and not fall into the same pitfalls that everyone can easily fall into sometimes in movement. That's the real cause of the change, and why I transitioned into this world, which I think is my true calling, I think, because I really enjoy fitness and performing myself, but I also helping other people get the benefits of that too.
Meet Symmio, a new way to improve your health and wellness and live a happier, healthier life. Symmio will take you through a step-by-step assessment that looks at the way you move, how you feel, and identifies lifestyle factors that contribute to your overall health and wellness. Symmio will help you understand your greatest opportunities to improve and identify any potential risk factors you may have. Once completed, you will receive a detailed wellness report and gain access to your Symmio dashboard. In there, you will find daily corrective exercises and lifestyle content designed to tackle your areas of focus and support you on your wellness journey. Ready to live a happier and healthier life? Take the first step and sign up for Symmio today. Well, it's so unfortunate, James, that almost everyone has a very similar story in that it takes that moment, personal moment, to realize I've got to do something. And especially in the world that we're in, fitness, wellness, and health, we have not gotten proactive enough. We're still reacting to the problems that we're having. And I think too often that's what people are searching for on the internet and everything else. Is like, yeah, my back hurts. I went, like you said, your story, I'm sure a lot of listeners can resonate. I was on my back and my back was spasming up. I couldn't do something. And you realize I've got to do something so this doesn't continue to happen. And, that's good in a way that it forces change. But I think part of our discussion, Gray and James, what we're trying to get to is, let's not get to that point. Let's get people leaning in before they're on their back and they can't move.
No, I think that Georgie Bear, do you know who I'm talking about? Erwan LaCour discusses him quite a bit in a lot of the MoveNat stuff. But he realized pre-World War I the level of dysfunction. And it was a ferry boat accident, and people a large percentage of the people riding this ferry boat couldn't pull themselves back in the boat. They couldn't lift themselves out of water with their own body. And his definition of function at that time was be useful. Be useful. And it was really his definition of fitness more than function. But he goes, fitness is simply, are you useful to yourself and others? And that's what I was thinking of when you found yourself in that vulnerable position. You actually imposed a burden on others and put yourself at risk. And the whole point is, I think a lot of people don't accept responsibility for that. They want to blame their trainers, their teachers, their coaches, their doctors for missing something. And what Lee and I have learned so much through the screens that we do before the movement screen, the pre-screens, the history, right? The sleep questions, the hydration questions, the relationship questions that come up when people are disabled. We've got to talk about all aspects of their life, because I don't know where all the toxicity is coming from. I know how to get mobility. I know how to get stability. I know how to make movement, but not if you're poisoning it upstream. I can't help you hold on to it. So those questions, I think, that you asked yourself, why do I have low back pain? Is this an aggregate of my lifestyle, or can I blame somebody for this? As soon as you get on the other side of that blame, you look in the mirror and you start the baby steps. And I think one of the problems with the expertise we have on the internet now is, if you decide sleep's your problem, you'll meet an expert. If you decide foot strength is your problem, you'll meet an expert. And if you decide low back pain is something you'd like to unpack, you'll meet an expert. But not any of these experts level the playing field and say, okay, this is the way the chess pieces fit in. This thing you're working on, that's a pawn. This thing you're ignoring, that's a queen. That's why you're going to lose the game right there. And so it's this scalability that I think you speak to in a lot of your work that makes it easy for people who find themselves in a state of weakness to get strength without doing it quite as hard as you did it, on yourself. I'm weak. I must be strong by Thursday. Strength don't happen by Thursday, but a little more stability can. A little more activity can, a little better sleep, a little hydration, and maybe some breathing awareness can. And that's a bit more fertile soil for strength to be planted. But a lot of people want to skip from unhealth to strength, and they need to do it quick for whatever reason. So.
And that was the thing. So if I look back on those days, it was around, I remember this clearly. It was around 2007. So that was the year I remember it all started, and it led me down this path. But if I look back now and realize what was happening, I was sleeping on maybe less than 4 to 5 hours a night, because I was going through a long period of the shifts. It was high-end stressful shifts as well with some of the work we're doing, because I was a part of some these specialist units at the time back then. But I was like living on maybe 5 hours if I was lucky. I was sitting down in a car for long periods of time. So long periods of inactivity for maybe 7-8 hours a time. Then there were fast moments of explosiveness work. I was wearing a lot of kit on myself. I was wearing big clumpy boots, like military style boots as well. So throw that into the fact that back then you could get free Starbucks. Police officers in London get a free drink of coffee at Starbucks. I was going for the big lattes and coffees in Starbucks 2-3 times, maybe sometimes 4 times a day to keep me going. And then, and then throw the whole breathing breathing side of things as well. That all was compounding onto each other. And then when we were having to train for an hour a day in the gym, and I was going just to the big compounds, lifting as heavy as I could because I was young, dumb, that type of mentality back when I was back then. So we'd lift heavy. I'd have all these underlying like lifestyle issues that I didn't even know I was aware of or was causing an issue. And looking back now, I can see it as plain as day. And that's some of the most important things. When I speak to other police officers now, or the tactical military operatives, that's some of the first things I want to look at, is because, look, we've got to address those issues, which aren't going to go away because that's part of day-to-day life. But we've got to address them before we go to the big fun stuff, because we all want to do the fun stuff in the weight room or go out for the runs or whatever you want to do. But it's those fundamental human basics of lifestyle that we have to address first, because, again, I see it with our clients, our day-to-day clients, not just the military guys and the police officers. But some people, if you haven't got nailed the basics down properly, you're always going to struggle. And that was one of the biggest things that happened to me. It was not having the basics. And I was compounding this effect of adding more weight onto dysfunction. I wonder who said that quote, right? You know what I mean? It was that was happening, and it just added up over time, and then went pop. At a point where I didn't need it to go pop, and that was the moment. That was the moment I've had enough, and it led me to a big shout out to Tommy Blom, actually, from Sweden. He was the one who introduced me to kettlebell, and then it led me to FMS and stuff like that. So it's a funny old journey, but something has to happen to you first, I think, for your journey to truly start to dive into the world. I'm sure all of us can relate to that too.
Yeah, and I think that's the tip. You had that tipping point. You had that moment where you realized you had to make a change. And I think you said something right there in that little soundbite, James, is that awareness. You realized that it was your lifestyle, things that you weren't not aware of, that was leading to that tipping point for you. And I think right now, as professionals in this space, we're trying to bring that up to the people we work with. How do you specifically, James, bring that up and get that buy-in from the people you're consulting with? Because you said something right there too, that it's not just the tactical groups you're working with, the police, the fire, the military people, just the person going into the office every day. How do you get them to become more aware that, yeah, you can go online and find a cool exercise to improve your hip mobility or your upper back mobility. Okay, I want to get my arms bigger. Those are easy. It's leaning into the fundamentals that people don't want to do. So give us some of your insights on how do you get people to lean in to start considering that and become more aware?
Yeah, sure. So this is the thing for us. So I remember this, again, it's one of those epiphany moments where I can't believe it's this simple, but this is what's happening. So I think it was after I saw you in Perform Better Germany, actually. We were talking about ideas of taking the FMS and doing stuff online. We started looking at some of the data, because just like you guys, I'm a data geek. My master's actually is in computer science. I'm a bit of a data geek when it comes to this stuff and mining whatever we saw. So what I saw was, we have two kind of types of clients, which I call them performance guys who are trying to go for a specific goal or an event or competing in a sport. And then we have lifestyles, where people just want to try and lose a little bit of weight, feel a bit better, that type of thing. And what we were finding was that a lot of the lifestyle guys we were working with weren't staying with us as long term or getting the same results as some of our performance clients were. And I was trying to figure out, how can we see the data and compare them? Because it's hard to compare somebody who's going for an elite Spartan race to somebody who's trying to lose their first 30 pounds or something like that. It was just, how do we find it? What's the data that we can all compare and contrast what we're pulling across? And then it just hit us. I had all these spreadsheets out and looking at the data from all our clients from the last 6 months. And we saw three key things. And three things that went, oh my God, this is the light bulb moment here, and how we're struggling to keep them on board and also getting the results they really want. The first thing was walking. What we saw was, on average, our performance clients were walking between 8,000 and 10,000 steps a day. That was the first thing, compared to our lifestylers who are averaging less than 3,000. And I was like, hang on a second, we can compare this now, because it's something we can compare and contrast the data to, because it's something they can all relate to. They all need to walk around and move around. So that was the first thing. The next thing, we looked at hydration. We asked them, rather than measure their glasses, because everyone's got different ways of measuring in ounces or liters, whatever it was, we said, how many glasses of water do you have a day? Again, it came down to the performance guys were having about 7, and then the lifestyles were having more 1 to 2 if they were lucky. That was the other thing here. And then the third thing, right? And we were looking at this sort of from all over the world, the data reporting from all over, and the third thing was sleep. The performance guys were averaging 7+ hours a night of sleep. The lifestylers were literally, if they were lucky, getting 5.5 to 6, right? And I know sleep's the hardest thing. So that was the first thing we saw. It was oh my God. which then came up with the acronym, what we call it WWS, walk, water, sleep. Because now for us, we think it's so imperative to have these fundamental basics of walking, water, and sleep, which I'm sure we can all agree with, because in the world of corrective exercise, there's polarizing ways of thinking about things. Some guys think something's good, something's bad, same as nutrition, religion, or politics, all these things is polarizing. But I think WWS, we can all technically agree on that is something that's good for you. I think it's like almost like a middle ground that you have here that we can play around with. Okay, so it's okay, this is a starting point. So we then, look at the data, look at the research. They say, good, about 7,000 steps improves life expectancy for most people. 7 glasses of water is approximately, half your body weight in ounces, give or take.
Let me interrupt right here, because what I think I love the way you're coming at this, but if you're drinking 7 glasses of water a day, you actually take up space from something else you would be drinking. So not just is it this great flush you're getting, but the hydration lesson you're getting is how many times do you reach from something wet and it's got sugar, caffeine, and a bunch of stuff you're not really going to metabolize anyway. So I love this rule of 7s, because you call it WW, but I'm seeing 7 come all the way through there.
777 rule. That's exactly right.
I love
That's exactly what we call it. The WWS and the 777 rule is what just came about. Just randomly looking at data. It was like, what's the film with like Russell Crowe? There's a Beautiful Mind where he's got all these numbers and stuff on here. Suddenly, like basic data from all this was like sticking out on the screen for us, and we saw this. So it became WWS and the 777 rule. And what we found was that if we get people walking more, they're naturally inclined to drink more water. And as they're walking more and drinking more water, suddenly their sleep starts to improve automatically. Now, I always think sleep is the hardest thing to correct. And I also get it if you've got kids, working shift, it's also super hard to manage. But we can do some little baby steps here. And what we found was when people are trying to follow a nutrition plan or like a high-end type of strength training plan, if they haven't got the basics in place, we're basically getting them to do something with their hands tied behind their backs, because they're never going to succeed. They can't do the fundamentals and basics of human movement right first, right? Or what we all need to begin with. How can we expect them to do a good, solid nutrition plan to help them lose weight? So it then became that if they haven't got WWS in place, we would not even look at nutrition. It became our mantra of like, nutrition is the last thing we correct. Even we know how important it is. It's the last thing we look at because it's the most complex to do. And if they haven't got these basics in place, well, we know like the average person eats 300 to 500 calories more a day if they sleep less than 7 hours. Then if they're drinking, like you said, they're drinking less than 7 glasses of water, they're going to reach for sugary drinks like the Red Bulls, all those type of things to get the energy from it. So it all tied in. Now, the other thing we saw as well was the breathing side of things. So, but we couldn't have WWS and B into it, because what we found was people, particularly the lifestylers, weren't aware they had a breathing issue. And it was something they looked at us going like, what do you mean I've got a breathing issue? You had to earn the right to build that relationship with them, to talk to them about breathing. So you had to sneak it into them. So if I could change the WWS and B, including breathing, though they would be our 4 fundamentals. But what we found is most lifestylers aren't aware, even though like it's the buzzword of the industry at the moment. Like sleep was the buzzword about 10 years ago. Now it's breathing. Like most lifestyle people, most everyday people don't get that they're breathing poorly or dysfunctionally. So you have to earn the right to have that conversation with them. So even though it's WWS, there's a breathing element to this as well, which we sneak in when they're ready to learn about it and adopt those new practices. And they're the 4 fundamentals that we've done with. So when we're trying to get to people to where we want to get to, right, before we look at anything, the most important thing to us is, do they have these basics in place? Yes or no? If it's a no, that's where 80% of our time is going to be, because again, you guys know as well, like so many effort goes into breathing. You fix someone's breathing, it can change a whole heap of things further down the screen, right? So we want to have those conversations early as best we possibly can. If that helps. If I've answered your question, that was a bit of a roundabout way to get to it.
No, go ahead. It's really cool. And in clinic, I got to attack breathing first, because it's got something to do with your low back pain. It's got something to do with the way we're going to do exercise. I can use it to help modulate tone, to dump tone, to create reflexive stabilization. So I'm going to attack breathing first as a physical therapist, but I can't emphasize enough, you created an environment through 7,000 steps, 7 hours sleep, 7 glasses of water, where breathing can reset itself if it were driven by a deficiency in one of those three things. So if your sleep's off, your cortisol's up, your hormones are wrecked. And if you're not simply running the energy that you take in through the system at a minimum, and so to me, you just gave us a rule of good enough. So all the Gray Cook, Lee Burton, James Breese correctives in the world don't fall on fertile soil if you can't show me 3/7. And you're welcome not to arrive at 3/7 the first week, but please, I hate to say it, lower your expectations of the seed when the soil's not ready. And I think that's such a delicate balance of the functional message. There is a functional exercise, but there's also a functional self-care plan, and not doing enough of either can't yield a whole result. And so I like that. So clinicians, if you've only got 7 visits, you better attack breathing because it's the heart of everything. But I often find that hydration and breathing go hand in hand because mouth breathers can never hydrate enough. And if you're hydrated enough and you do have a breathing problem, we'll still be able to find it on the other end, but it might be gone when we get there if we're too hypervigilant. So the last thing I want to see is a lot of breathing instruction and exercises on the internet, because if you haven't met 3/7, I wouldn't expect that your breathing would be honoring a good state of homeostasis, sympathetic, parasympathetic balance.
And James, I love that, how simple you kind of whittled it down and using the data to do it. Because I think we've got so much data coming at us, we don't know where to start. Like the individual, if I just say the individual at home trying to lose some weight, they have no idea where to start. Simple, the rule of these 3/7. But when you started implementing that, 2 questions I've got, James. One, what did you see on the data when you started really almost forcing that onto people? And what was the feedback? How long did it take for a person to start, whether the data changed or whether they just started feeling better? How long does it take for someone? I know that's a tough question to answer because it's going to depend on so many other variables, but what were you seeing?
So there's so many elements to this now we can go down to, but the first thing was though, let's go. One of the biggest things in the industry, the easiest thing to sell people is fat loss, because people need it more than ever at all. Our fat loss results went through the roof. Let's just put it straight down to that. Once we got people from and you looked at data from around the world, because you have to also understand that there's different elements in Europe compared to America, for example. Like in Europe, people are easily walking 7,000-8,000 steps a day because the infrastructure allows it. Whereas, for example, when I was living in San Diego, you could hardly walk half a mile down the road before the there's a freeway and there's no sidewalk and stuff like that. It's completely different, except in the big cities like DC, Chicago, and New York. So the first thing was we saw the fat loss results literally go through the roof. Like they like this as simple challenges that they all could do. We also saw in the data that a lot of the higher end guys weren't walking as much as they could do. So that was the first thing, was like seeing these changes and seeing weight loss here. So we then found out that our tipping point in terms of fat loss was then 15,000 steps a day. So we found then that there's a point of no return, and we want to improve as much as we can. So if they're doing all their workouts and they're enjoying this challenge of hitting 7,000 steps a day, with one step at a time, we found the best results when people got to 15,000 steps a day. They were doing the water, they're drinking the water, they're sleeping well, they're doing the workouts. That was the tipping point for us. That's what we first saw in the data, was like, okay, first step 7,000. Then if they're a fat loss client, we need to get them further up the chain. That was it. Now, the other thing we found was this kind of game. We developed this gamification around it. And we also found that a whole load of research about walking speed, getting to 4 miles an hour. So we're like, this is interesting. What can we do to make walking fun for people and a little bit of a challenge? So we created our 20-minute walk test. So the goal was, can you walk 20 minutes in 1.5 miles in 20 minutes? That was kind of how we saw that's achievable. And suddenly we have people in their 50s and 60s. They can't run a marathon, or they can't do it. They don't want to do it anymore. But my God, they were becoming competitive about hitting this 1.5 mile marker. So we suddenly got people going. When they first tested, it was literally at a mile, if they were lucky, maybe 1.1 miles. And this test is a lot harder than people realize. It really is. So then we're like, okay, let's get to 1.5 miles. So 1.5 miles became 2 miles in 30 minutes. It then became 3 miles in 45, and then 4 miles in an hour. And suddenly we were having competitions of like who can go out the longest and work at this time. So it had a huge knock-on effect, which then had a knock-on effect to people's cardiovascular capacity. So we saw randomly, we started seeing numbers like, again, one of our tests is like what we call a work capacity snapshot. It's like the 2K row, fairly safe. Most people have a row, a concept 2 row in their gym. Let's just row, see what happens. We saw people who were complete novices rowing maybe 11, 12 minutes, which is, quite an amateur time, but it's a starting point for these guys. They were dropping down to about 9 minutes and they hadn't been on the rower because they were building their walking capacity and their cardiovascular capacity at a lower threshold, but more volume over time, which then had a carryover effect to people maybe wanting to start running and enjoying running because they had a better capacity to go into that as well. So that was the first thing. Now, in terms of buy-in, it's all about education. You guys know this as well. And like anyone out there, you've got to educate them and explain why you're doing what we're doing. If you ask them to do it straight away, they're like, there's a bit of bite back. I just want to go and do this. But what we found, it had to come down to like ebooks, some podcasts, sharing them with the guys so they can absorb and listen to first to get the buy-in. And once they got the buy-in, then it was absolutely fine. They totally got it. And then it became a challenge for them to build a habit to get to the next level. So like Mario Brothers, the film's out at the moment. So to the next level, to the next level, to the next level, we kind of gamified it to make it a challenge for them. And we said, come on, guys, you can do this. Once you get this, we're going to start the nutrition side of things. So it sped things up along the way. Now, there were some people, obviously, who didn't want to buy into it. And then, if I'm being honest, we kind of said goodbye to them because they weren't people who were ready to make a change anyway. They wanted a quick fix. And what we're offering is not a quick fix, as you try and know. So it's the buy-in with the people's right state of mind and mentality to come into the whole world of this change and understanding that it just has to be as simple as this to begin with. Right? We can get to the fancy stuff, like all the corrective exercises, all the strength training, and all the fun stuff you want, guys, all the plyo jumps and box jumps you want to do. But let's earn the right to get there first. So we had to gamify it and like find these ways of figuring things out along the way. But it was the walking that set everything up. It's like this challenge of the realization that they couldn't walk a mile and a half in 20 minutes, yet our 62-year-old client, Terry, could. So we had it so many times. A lot of 30-year-old guys, men go, yeah, I can do this easy. And then they realize they can't do it. So it became a challenge for them. So that's kind of how we played around with it a little bit.
I think right now, walking is probably the most functional activity on the planet for the simple fact that it's the first real thing we do as kids. It's a huge accomplishment. And when we lose it, our life changes forever. But you also said it seems to be very transferable to everything else you want to do. So a walking base is the most solid, stable platform that'll get you to the next thing you want to do as a human. And that might actually be swimming. You don't know. Rowing. People look for that kinesiological connection and forget that good gait is an elegant relationship with gravity. And if you got that, I can work with it. So
yeah, and it's interesting as well. It's like because we see a lot of people coming to us who hate running, and I understand. But again, I'm preaching to the converted here now, like because most people aren't ready to run. Like they want to run to lose weight, but they're not ready to run, and they always associate running with pain and misery and suffering. But what they haven't got is just their joints and everything aren't strong enough.
That's a humbling thing for an ex-athlete. You're a probably more accomplished athlete than either of us. You've got an athletic and tactical background. So I hate to say it, but both those environments rub your physical weakness in your face in a tighter feedback loop than general life does. And what you've created is some of those transparent and truthful feedback loops for people. Because the day I realized I can't run anymore without a month's worth of work to get back after surgery or an accident or something like that, that's humbling for an athlete or a tactical person to face. And so I can see what that is, but I can't give myself an excuse for not walking. But I tell you what, 4 miles per hour, I think is a better goal than rucking. And I enjoy rucking, and I'm a big proponent of that extra load. But if I'm not even at 4 miles an hour comfortably, I think I could work my pace up before I add a load. And I know a lot of people will have that argument, but I'm an orthopedic specialist. I can tell you 4 miles per hour is going to be a lot easier on your skeleton than if you can only go 3 and you want 30 pounds too. Just 4 miles an hour is going to come so quick. Why not achieve that first?
Well, exactly, and that's this is the cool thing. So like, we developed a whole set of protocols for like rucking, because again, I'm a big fan of rucking. Like, again, it's just one of those. I grew up in Wales here, where it's the home of the SAS Penrhyn selection course. So like that's been on my doorstep for years. So it's funny seeing everyone doing all the challenges up and down that mountain now, because I've seen them for years. But what we found was there's always more challenges. So what we found was like we got people to like this is all age groups, and I think it's super important, not just for like the people who are older like to do this as well, but I think all age groups improve their walking speed. Because I always look at my grandfather, or my tide, as they say in Welsh down here now. I think of how his feet are just shuffling along. He's shuffling along, not enjoying his health span at his age. He's almost 100 years old now, but his health span is not good because he's shuffling along and sitting down most of the time. I want to be walking like one of those speed walkers at 100 years old. I want to be snowboarding, doing all these funny things. So what we found was, when we got people going to 4 miles an hour comfortably, we were like, okay, what's the next walking challenge? So we then started to add load in terms of rucking. So we then go 5% body weight for 20 minutes, 1.5 miles. We then do the same for 30 minutes and 2 miles, 3 miles and 45, and 4 miles at 5%. And what we found was we could build people up to 25% body weight over time, doing the same pace. And I tell you what, those guys are absolutely machines. Men, women. We've got a late shout out to Sarah Picella, one of our clients at the moment. She's a judge in the States, but she had knee surgery 2 years ago, was struggling to get back anything. She can't run anymore because of everything that's gone around it. But my God, she is rucking like no one else. She is doing 4 miles an hour with 25% body weight on her back. She's a machine. And it's so funny seeing that progression up here, like build up slowly from here. And that's her enjoyment with her life. And she says that carries over to like she had to go to the airport recently with her kids, like under one arm, like a suitcase in another, carrying here, and she was walking like a speed demon. She said that was the easiest she's ever felt through an airport. So it has such a carryover, I think, walking, rucking to lifestyle, general well-being, and real world activity. I think it's an absolutely massive thing to do.
No, you're a data geek, but I think the relationship you had with her is way more of a transformation than transaction. But the fact that you hold the line, the fact that you've created numbers, and the fact that I think you've created elegant feedback loops, or how somebody as smart as a judge just realized what you're saying. It is that simple. And sometimes you got to turn off all the experts to find what's good enough in each domain. I love the way you did that. You argued it from the bottom, but you also know where the tipping point is for weight loss. But we still argued it from the bottom, because how many people hurt themselves or damage themselves trying to lose weight that won't stay off anyway? So, there's a path to getting healthy, and healthy bodies lose weight healthy ways, and unhealthy bodies lose weight, but not in sustainable or healthy ways.
So James, does this walking program that you've devised, how much does that continue through the person's life cycle of how you're working with them? And what I mean by that is there a time where you transition to weight training or more of, circuit type training where you decrease the amount of walking that you're going to prescribe to that individual? How does that transition take place?
Yeah, it totally depends on the thing. So the biggest thing that we've transitioned to over the years, and this is like where we realized very quickly. So like with the advent of modern technology and apps and like software and training software, the biggest problem we always found was that if you're doing one-to-one sessions with somebody, you're limited by their affordability. Can they afford your services, and time and flexibility on their part? So like maybe they come in to see you 1, 2, 3 times a week, and that was it. There was nothing else on the other 160 plus hours in the week. Whereas every one of our one-to-one clients now we have what we call a hybrid approach, where they can come in person, maybe once or twice a week. Most of them come in now once a week, but the rest of the week they have a program to follow for the rest of the 7 days. So we got people doing stuff 7 days a week, 3 times a day. I'm not saying they're training 3 times a day. They maybe do like a 10, 15 minute mobility snack, as we call it, in the morning. Maybe doing something in terms of walking, to go out for a little walk at halftime, just as a little nudge, as a reminder. And then they're doing the training on top of that. It depends on how it flows. So when it comes to somebody now, is that our approach is a 7-day approach. So when we always try and look at things like, okay, well, are they walking? Are they doing enough walking already? If not, okay, we're going to program this in. Ideally, something every day is the key thing here. If it's, well, let's take it a beginner. A good example is someone who joined us last week. So their average step count was less than 4,000. I know that's straight off the top of my head because this is live, right? Less than 4,000. So our priority is, right, we need to help them walk more often and hold them accountable to it. But they want to come and train, so we need to have that aspect as well, to factor all this in. So they're doing a 20-minute walk every day, and they're doing training 3-4 times a week on top of that. Now, if we see any corrective stuff, we'll add some mobility work in here, addressing those correctives separately or as part of the workout itself. So we try and like encourage it across the board. Now, some people, when they get to a certain goal, they want to transition to something different. So we'll focus on something different. If, maybe someone's gone from walking and they now want to run, we'll do a bit of running. But we still want to maintain. So every month there'll be a check-in to see what's your average daily step count. So we hold them accountable around that. If it drops down, then we'll factor in walking back into it. But it's the whole monitoring process and like every step of the way to make sure someone doesn't dip down. Again, one of our clients recently has been training really hard, but we haven't been tracking their daily steps or getting them to walk as often. They got way stronger on their assessments after we've reassessed them after 6 weeks. However, they put a bit of weight on. But it's only when we go back and look at the data and we realize their step count has gone from 12,000 down to 4,500 that starts to paint the real picture. So is it the program or is it the daily step count and the fact they're walking less and as part of the whole thing? So for us, walking is an integral part to everything we do, but it's also something we monitor when we can. And then if we want to transition, because we don't want to monitor and count steps every day, because that's like counting calories every day. We don't want to do that. But it's something we have to revisit if people have issues, and we need to focus it back on and hold them more accountable to getting that done. Does that answer the question a little bit?
Yeah, it does, James. And I think it leads me to this one is the program you're talking about with walking, because I mean, we kind of got to this walking conversation. Yeah. Is it structured? Meaning when you start to ask and start to monitor their walking, or is it just what part of their day? So if if I typically take a phone call, I usually try to walk when I'm on the phone and I'm not thinking about walking. I'm just circling my office or circling the, wherever, but I am walking. So when you try to collect that data, do you just say, just look at the steps and count the steps? Or are you saying, hey, is it more structured than that?
It's more structured. So we literally program it into them. So I'll give you an example. So if you were to ask a runner to run a 5K as fast as you can and did that every day, they're going to blow out. They're just going to blow out. You would never do that. However, what we found is if you ask somebody to walk as hard as you can for 20 minutes, it doesn't have any detrimental effect onto their training that we've seen, right? So we program into their day 20-minute walk test. Walk as fast as you can for 20 minutes and try and aim for 1.5 miles and try and beat your previous time. Because that's the structure we try and give it. Or we then go, hey, 30 minutes, aim for 2 miles in 30 minutes, which is actually easier than the 20-minute one, but it gives them some like structure. So we say 30 minutes, 2 miles, there's your goals, that's your objective, let's go for that. So we give them some structure. Now, again, to date, I've had nobody get injured from walking faster. People look at them quite weird as they're power walking and doing all the funny steps a little bit sometimes because they have to move their arms. But it does, to get that pace, you have to really move your arms and improve your gait pattern essentially too. So that's the structure we're going. We're being specific with them. Go, right, do this and do that until we can transition them off until it becomes a more natural pace. Because I always think of it in this term as well. In athletic sports like soccer, for example, you want to improve someone's top end speed to improve what we call their speed reserve, right? So they're operating below the top end threshold, so they're acting in the safe zone around here.
Right.
Well, what if we build up someone's walking speed reserve? What if 1.5 miles, it becomes easy for them? We get them faster and we can operate within this safe parameters around here. That's the kind of the thought process I'm going on here. So it's very much structured until they've earned the right to move on, but then we can revisit it if we see them sliding back on other areas, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And I actually commend you because we're at a point right now, we never thought we'd have to tell people how to eat. Food was so scarce throughout humanity that you were lucky to get enough. Too much was never a problem. When we have to do something as simple as walking, I spent last week at the theme parks down in Orlando, Universal Studios and Disney. So I'm sitting here being dad, husband, and I still got about 10% functional gray cook looking around going, oh my God, this isn't gait. This is just poking holes in the ground until you find a bench. And I've been there, but we can't just tell people that walk like that to walk more, because well before often is something. Do you ever have a red flag on your intake, whether it be in person or through a internet relationship with somebody, where you would hold back on the walking until you vetted some things? Or have I heard you say, or your walking program is pretty solid? I watched Pavel do this at the RKC. He created a kettlebell hardstyle swing. He knew we weren't ready to do that. He knew we didn't read Naked Warrior, and he knew we didn't have enough flexibility. And Pavel was smart enough to teach us how to brace ourselves for we weren't ready for. But if we're going to do it anyway, this is the best way. So have you got a bulletproof walking program, or do you still have people that would send a red flag across the bow and you say, hey, vet these two things, let's re-engage in 2 weeks or something? So
yeah, that's a really good question. There's a couple of things we look at. If I just look at the basic simplicity of everything here now, of like, because again, I'm one of these things, like I'm from the Dan John school of thought, keep it simple, stupid. Like, what can I take away from things to make it as simple as we can? So that there's a couple of things that flag up to me. Straight away, first of all, the waist to height ratio. If I see people over 0.5, I'm going to be conscious of they are an overweight client. But if I see something over 0.6, do I really want to make them walk fast and make them really sweat harder and put them in a position of like discomfort where they may not enjoy it? Now that comes also into the idea of like their resting heart rates. Now I know resting heart rates can differ with different conditions and stuff, but as an overall snapshot, if I see somebody's resting heart rate, pretty high, if I'm talking like late 60s and 70s, again, that's a bit of a simple red flag for me to look and go, right, well, maybe I'm not going to get them to walk fast yet. Maybe I'm not going to tell them the results of their 20-minute test yet, and whether it's good or bad. I'm going to hold off a little bit so they build up some gentle, easy volume first. So I think sometimes you can go too fast, too hard, too soon. And I think it's the same on walking as well. I think a lot of people jump to rocking too fast, too hard, too soon as well. I think there's got to be an idea of like, let's build up this capacity. Let's just go basic endurance principles. Let's build up some easy capacity, help them lose a little bit of weight first through other principles, make them feel better about themselves. And then we slowly get them a bit faster after that. But that's, again, when anyone comes back on, high body fat percentage, that type of thing, we always got to be aware of those red flags. But I think the resting heart rate and sometimes the active heart rate test we do, the good old fashioned YMCA test we get people all around the world doing, because it just gives us an idea of where they're at cardiovascularly too. It's something as simple as that, but that's elegant. Steps.
That you actually built in a risk factor limiter, so you're not going to blow somebody up. You're just going to slow them down, but the mission didn't change. The rate of progress changed, and you waited for that response. I got another one for you. Walking speed or the weight we carry walking. Now, I'm going to come at walking and breathing from two guys who both opened my eyes to breathing. Wim Hof would say, you see a hill coming, you can overbreathe or pre-breathe the situation to actually ease up that hill better than if you just let the load happen to you. A being connected with this environment would already be in sync with the hill. Phil Maffetone would say, stop running and walk, because if your heart rate goes out of that low cardio zone, you're going to make an orthopedic poor decision. So Phil Maffetone's breathing limit says, let the workload determine the breath, but you will learn to breathe better. Wim Hof says pre-breathe the situation. Do you use any breathing cues to take a slow, short walker and give them double capacity same day? Because when I reverse my breathing on a kettlebell swing, I double my capacity because of the intrinsic integrity of an inhale on a light load gives me more core stability after maybe a problematic episode. So
so
you go ahead.
Straight away, like both those guys, massive influence as well to us. We use a lot of Phil Maffetone's work, and the 180 minus your heart rate, minus your age, is a huge thing for us because of the simplicity of it. Because everyone's zone 2 is calculated by different watches in different ways, right? There's no uniform method and different things. However, the Maffetone method, 180 minus your age, is, it's good enough. Good enough is good enough for some things. And particularly we were doing online coaching back in 2015, 16 before it got big. Like I remember the conversation in Before Better Germany was talking to Lee about, look, how do I take everything we're doing with FMS and do it online? So we had to figure some of these things out. And one of the biggest things we found was we're a big fan of like, growth comes within comfort. Paul McElroy, a friend of mine, says this, like, don't neglect the fact that growth can come in comfort, right? Expand your comfort zone. And that's kind of how we approach this to walking, is like, well, if we take someone's, we want to get them walking for speed first, right? And then capacity, right, without load. Because again, I take the phrase that you guys do, don't load weight onto dysfunction. Like it's one of the biggest things I remember coming back and forth. So I went the same principle. Okay, let's build up the capacity from 20 minutes to 60 minutes and getting going at a good speed. Then we go with weight on top. But then if they've got a heart rate tracker, which most people have these days, we go, right, if your heart rate's going above 180 minus your age, like using the math method, draw back. Let's keep the comfort side of things. Let's expand your comfort zone, right? So it swallows up your overall threshold and we can go further into it, but it keeps the enjoyment factor. I think people negate the enjoyment factor. A lot of people who are new to fitness, right? Some people love the beatdown. Don't get me wrong. Like there's all the time why you want that sort of thing. But a lot of newbies, you put yourself in and empathize with them in their position. They don't want to beat down. They've been beaten down enough by life and like everything else in the past. They just want to enjoy it and feel this like, that felt good, I can go again type of mentality. So when it comes to the breathing, we use that side of things to maintain our breathing. And we also encourage nasal breathing throughout. Just something as simple as that. Hey, try and breathe through your nose as much as you can. It's one of the cues you write on their little list of things to do. So like nasal breathe throughout, try and maintain this pace, have a smile, go and enjoy it. That's kind of how we approach it.
No, I can't commend that approach enough in taking both those things and not putting them against each other, but just looking at assets in both camps. But I really think whether you practice some Wim Hof and do some of his tricks or listen to Phil Maffetone and do some of his stuff, you're growing aware that your breath and your movement is connected, and you can't always change your movement. But I love to put people on balance beams and then resync their breathing. Balance upgrades a third and their effort goes down. And so I just think that there's such a cool message here, because Lee and I come off of 25 years of precision corrections, assuming that you knew self-care. You walked enough to hit save on the document. If I add 10 degrees to your hip extension or dorsiflexion and you don't hit 7,000 steps a day, it doesn't become part of your gait behavior. Therefore, it's not reinforced. And so there is a minimum amount of gear mesh that the human transmission needs to embrace the lesson, no matter how specific Gray Cook corrective it is. The other thing you mentioned is Lee and I have spent an entire career in sports medicine working with people who don't do enough or do too much. And part of the exit from rehabilitation back to life is I got to put a governor on that person and I got to butt kick this one. And they both were asking for the opposite when they walked in the door. The one who'd already kicked their own butt wanted a harder program, thinking somehow they would emerge like Jason Bourne, not remembering why. You remember exactly why you got good. He had amnesia. So.
No, but it is funny, the whole aspect of trying to move things harder and faster. But like I said, if I'm like again, I come back to my original degrees. I did languages, French and German, and I did a master's in computer science. I didn't go down the typical route of doing like exercise science or like biomechanics or like physical therapy. I didn't do that. So when it came down to simplifying things, it's how my brain works. And I go back to Dan John, and a huge effort to him, because like, keep it simple, stupid. Well, it's for me to understand it. Like, what are the simple steps? Because I then bring the logic into it from all the computer science stuff I was doing, going, what's if this, else do this, that type of method. And I try and bring the two of them together. So it is. And, we always try and, don't get me wrong, the fun stuff is sometimes program design, the art and craft of it. There is an art to it. But we sometimes forget as coaches, because we also have what I call the curse of knowledge. Like, we've been in this game of fitness training for such a long time. You guys have been doing corrective exercise and functional movement for such a long time, that where you guys are at right now, and you're probably, with a lot of your research you're doing at the moment, it's already way up here, and the rest of the world hasn't seen it yet. So you guys are thinking like 20 steps ahead already. It's like us with everyday people. We're thinking 20, 30, maybe even 100 steps ahead of them. So it's a reminder to go, right, do you know what? Let's go back into their shoes. Day one, what happens? How do we do it? Let's bring it back to these simple basic mechanics, but also that we can all agree on. Because that's, again, I come back to WRS, we can pretty much agree on this. Walk more, drink more water, sleep more. That's a thing that everybody profession can do it. Whereas a lot of other people and other things like nutrition, again, I know it's important, but we don't start with that because it's such a polarizing thing and people have different relationships with it. So, and the same also, to honestly, the same with corrective exercise and like pain treatment. I'll go back to myself back in the day. I saw every chiro, physio, osteopath you can imagine, like to try and get me fixed. They all said different things. None of it worked, right? So it affected my relationship with those guys. So I had an association with like, oh, these guys they're quacks. They're just making shit up as they go along. Pardon my French, but that was kind of like how I thought about it. But it wasn't the case. You find the right people and connections, it starts building up. So keep it simple, stupid is our mantra. How do I explain it to like a 7-year-old? And then we can start going up the further up the chain to do other things after that. And it's just something that we all, I think I struggle with now with what we call a curse of knowledge. But I'm sure you guys do too, and other people out there. It's like we're so far ahead of the game in our learning and understanding what health and well-being and fitness is, that sometimes we leave the other guys that we're treating way behind. Sometimes even our staff as well, because I've done that in the past too.
No, I can appreciate that. And it's probably good you didn't go through a classic exercise science education, because Lee and I left our BS degree thinking the only variables of exercise were frequency, intensity, and duration. It was a very volume-oriented exercise often philosophy. And I think for certain populations in certain places, that's good enough. 777 will get you right. Some people haven't covered well in other domains. There's a unwell reason they're not doing that. So if you move well before you move often, and when you move often, you do the right frequency, intensity, duration, not to do any harm, then we're there. Mm-hmm. And Lee and I have spent so much time defining well what's good enough in these functional physical domains that I'll be honest with you, I thank God you've put together the programs you have, because they fix most of what we're talking about before it's a problem if you're proactive. And if you got to have pain to be here, you've given somebody 7 or different ways out of that hole. Pick your pace, But I love the fact that we had to define well, but it doesn't mean that the volumes and often isn't important, because if you don't do enough often, you don't reinforce the well. So it's really neat to know that on the other side of good screening, testing, and assessment that we've dedicated our lives to, somebody has come to programming with that much scrutiny and hadn't made it about an exercise device. You made it about a step, a cup of water, and an hour's worth of sleep. And I swear we forget that. I forget that shit. 7,000 steps. I can fly to LA this weekend and still get my 7,000 steps in because I'm on my feet a lot. I can't hit 7 hours to save my life, but I'm getting closer, so.
Yeah, James, how refreshing it is for how clear and concise that message is, and how unfortunately the individuals come and seek out us as professionals, and we overcomplicate it. The professionals are the ones that are overcomplicating something that really does need to start at quality, which is what we've been preaching for 25 years, well before often. And I think that's what hearing you talk is kind of, and almost you've come a little bit full circle too, James, is where, you've had all that information and you got it down to, and looking at the data, let the data kind of dictate how you got to that point has been impressive.
And but again, it's learning from you guys as well. I think this is really important to give kudos to you guys and stuff here. You've got a screen you follow the same process every single time. You have a system, right? The system allows here. So I was like, okay, well, the FMS guys have a system in place. They follow every single step of the way. There's a reason for that, because you test everyone the same way. You can start to see patterns and trends, right? And I was like, well, okay, let's do the same sort of thing here with basic health assessments for us. Let's just see what happens. Just make it, in-house discussed, right, what's our uniform approach to doing this? Let's assess exactly the same way for health, see what comes up. And it was by doing that, everything started to come up in front of us, and we could see it clearly in what was happening on the data. Now, the cool thing was, let's get back to like FMS and like the corrective exercise and the fun stuff that we kind of geek out on too. Is like once people had these things nailed down, our correctives were so much simpler, so much easier. Just from the walk, the water, and the sleep, suddenly people's T-spines were opening up, right? So suddenly, like it was just, it's funny enough, actually, what we saw was when people were walking more, the ankle dorsiflexion improved without us even doing anything. That was a huge aspect of what we saw too. And then the breathing alone, again, like just simple, we could relax into everything. Active straight leg raise started improving, shoulder mobility. It made our life easier to correct. So let's just go back to the real reason that we were trying to do it as well, is like, well, some people were just like, it was hard to correct, particularly online, right? When you haven't got hands on, you can't lay hands on to people. How do we find ways to correct? Well, it was hard. Some people just wouldn't budge. But we added this in, and it added like a flavor that it was just so much more potent, right, to getting the results. We wanted to improve their movement quality. And once we improve their movement quality, right, and get it to a good enough to go type of mentality, well, guess what we can do? We can add more load, we can add more weight, they can train faster, perform better, and all that fun stuff that they really want to do when they get to the ending. So it's like kind of like for us personally, it was like the missing piece of a puzzle, particularly online, to add to the fuel to the fire to get them to move better. So kudos to you guys. And that's where the idea for the system was like, okay, well, simplicity, keep it simple, stupid, like the simplicity, the sequencing, and also the ordering of how we do these things to get to the results we wanted to get to. And that's why, like, again, Leo, I remember speaking in German to you and just talking to you outside. They have this beers and pretzels thing. If anyone's been to Perform Better in Germany, they have this beers and pretzels thing at the end of on the Friday, right? It's a great way of doing it. It's typical German, right, way of doing things. We were chatting over there doing it and saying, look, Leo, how can I do the FMS stuff online? We were chatting back and forth. And that's why I'm kind of excited about seeing Symmio at the moment. And like I think we can talk about it a bit now, and like seeing what you guys are doing then, because we had to figure out these questions and how we assessed online as you guys were trying to figure it out and play around with it as well. But now you've got the data and the research, and we've applied some of that with our clients already, and it goes down really well. So it's fun to see how that all this ties together and comes back to helping, one solid platform. How do we keep it simple? How do we help more people, particularly around the world, and keeping it simple, but also like getting better results for people in the easiest possible way as well.
And I don't know about other spaces, but the topic of AI is right on the tip of everybody's tongue right now. But AI is not fixing human movement. But I think we can use some of the techniques and tactics to deliver reasonable solutions to people who may not have the access, right? I mean, a cell phone is how we get micro loans in Africa right now, right? And they didn't even have telephone lines, and they went right to cell phone. AI is something you understand is simply a tool in a vehicle, but you still must program the tolerances of the data sharing and pattern recognition. And AI just sifts for what we tell it to look for. So the inspiration on reclaiming human movement is going to change every generation because we're going to make different mistakes. One generation is going to be malnourished and undereducated. One is going to be overeducated and overnourished. And our movement response and our physical culture is going to have to pivot to fill the brain body nutrients, right? Mm-hmm. And if you undercut either one of those, we get a sick head or a sick body or a sick head trying to fix a sick body. My point is, I see a lot of people throwing data at a computer, hoping to get an answer for human physical culture. Human physical culture has been good and bad, and we've got examples historically of both. But if what you're doing on the internet and what I think Lee and our team has done with Symmio, it's let us ask you a few questions. Let us ask you to do a few moves. Let us ask you to reflect and be honest about a few things. And let us hand you a report card. And we're trying to be as transparent and truthful. And we're giving you the bare minimum of what the experts say in sleep, breathing, hydration, nutrition, movement, wellness, movement activity levels, behavioral health, past injury, and BMI. We're going to be in this space, and we're going to help you focus for a minute, because getting out of debt is more important than trying to figure out a way to make more money. As long as you got a hole in the bucket, don't keep looking for water, plug the hole. And that is the simple cover good enough before you reach for a hack or anything else, especially if good enough is 3 sevens away or a simple screen away or a simple bit of, you're right, I don't need 7 soft drinks a day. I need 7 cups of water. It's just, you got to face that thing. And full circle with my own health problems, our advice isn't wrong. You just got to decide and then face it. And it's real easy to say it. It's harder to do it. But I think by people being able to see those steps that you've given them how to do it, and people see a 10-minute investment with an app may change the trajectory of my fitness goal, I'll actually get there quicker. I mean, it's nothing but GPS. We need AI stuff with GPS, but you still got to pick where you want to go. And if the GPS ever goes down, I'd like to think I know enough about this journey to do it without Gray Cook or Lee Burton or James Breese. That's how we know we made an impact. When we have limited access and change your trajectory, we create a transformation.
And that's what I like where you guys are going as well, because like what we found, like, you know, inadvertently to doing all this was that, so I'll take an example. Like, we found that we FMS'd all our performance guys. The guys who were coming in-house to see us, we'd FMS them because that, you know, the gold standard, we can get an answer. We know the data behind this. There's thousands of data points where we just know what's going on. But there was a lot of people online around the world that we couldn't do that with. So we had to figure out ingenious ways to try and find our own way to try and help that happen. That was the conversation me and Lee were having. Like, well, how do I get them to do this? How do I try this? But what you guys are doing with Symmio now is like this idea of like people self-assessing. Because I actually think self-assessment is super key to having people understand and have the mirror in front of them go, oh my God, I actually have a problem I didn't know about. It leads to better conversations. So like, don't get me wrong, most of the people we work with around the world, they're self-assessing. We don't assess them in person anymore. They self-assess, similar to what you're doing in the Symmio app, and similar to what we've now taken from the Symmio app and using something to get people to do these things as well. That's how we focus on it. It's self-assessment that starts the conversation going, that leads to this conversation of like all this other realm of other health conversations and questions later down the line. So I think it's a key thing. Like, you know, where we've got the FMS kits to doing the gold standard in person working, fantastic. We now have an app on the system to help us get people to self-assess. So, which is, I think it was 87% accurate based on the recent study you guys had as well, which is pretty, again, it's just good enough is good enough to give you enough data to give you the right source of information to get in the right program design.
No, I'm a proud papa of that, because I always didn't mind the movement screen at academic scrutiny. The movement screen didn't come from academia. It came from the trenches of athletic pre-participation physicals and what are we missing? That's where it came from. Bunch of smart guys already educated that realized education wasn't covering the need in our local community. But where that went for me is I knew from the very beginning of a functional approach, there wasn't enough Lee Burtons and Gray Cooks to go around. In 2001, I started writing Athletic Body and Balance as an app, not a book, because the self-assessment you did in the doorway with a dowel was not to make you read the rest of the book. It was take you to the chapter of the test that you failed and sort of send you on a movement journey of reclaiming that, not in isolation or body sculpting strategy, but there's a movement pattern in your arsenal that's missing. And if you do anything in the future functional, you're going to need it. You just don't know it yet. So let's preload that. So it's seeing my intent, because if you do bad enough on a self-appraisal, you're going to do better to find a pro. They're just going to save you time. If you can't learn how to shoot a pistol, go find somebody who knows how to shoot one. They'll save you months and bullets and accidents. But if you can get there slowly on your own and you can check the boxes that people like yourself and we've tried to provide, hey, I don't need to meet you to help you. As a matter of fact, that's a personal thing, but I'd love to give you a little bit of navigation of this thing because I feel partly responsible for breaking it. My profession has both picked up the ball and dropped the ball. So I should be the one to fix that as a strength coach, as a PT. We've made mistakes. Just freaking own them and move on. We made you think that you had to come to us to learn to move, right? I'd like to give you some early warning signs to be prudent about. And if it still doesn't work, I'm here. So.
But it's interesting as well. Like what I've also found, go back to the original book, because that's how I discovered it. I actually read Athletic Body and Balance and Movement like one after the other. Like I bought them both at the same time as soon as I found out about you guys, and read Athletic Body and Balance, then Movement. Didn't really understand either of them. If I'm being honest,
Sorry
like
about that.
back in, but it was like, wow, it's like, this is so new to me. But so I gravitated more towards, Athletic Body and Balance, because movement was a little bit over my head back then. And it still is a little bit now, if I'm being brutally honest, because that's just the way. But I remember looking back now and seeing what you're getting people to do, like self-assess within a door, all those type of things. I didn't get that at the time, but I get it now. I understand the importance of getting people to self-assess and having that face the mirror moment where, like, oh my God, there's an issue. Because until they know there's an issue, they have no idea. Like little things like that. So it's funny how it comes to circle. Like I look back to 2008, 9, 10 when I did the original FMS courses, and it's taken me 10 plus years, whether it's just me being thick or whatever it is, but it's taken me to really understand the beauty of the simplicity of some of the stuff that happens, particularly like in the correction algorithm and applying the correction algorithm that you guys have. Like, where do you start? Okay, yeah, cool. That makes perfect sense, because not everyone does it. A lot of people I know personally that, when they're new to it, they'll do the testing, but they don't know how to correct. And it's taken me a long time to figure that out now, because it just takes a lot of time to sit in and experience in the trenches to see what you need to do. So,
well, I've seen a lot of people.
It's interesting.
I've seen a lot of people arrive on the internet space who don't have mine and Lee's background. And even though they've had a painful experience, they haven't credentialed themselves like you have. They just have a story of knee pain or back pain. And through trial and error, they learn how to fix it. And their story resonates so well with somebody, and the general public has partially been disappointed, right? By practitioners, politicians, teachers, coaches. We've been disappointed because a lot of people forgot a lot of fundamental physical steps of growth and development. And the medical model creates dependence, not independence, because if the medical model truly created independence, it would go broke. It creates unnecessary dependence and helps people suffer comfortably, not become independent comfortably, as you have advised we can. So when I look at the perspective of what we're doing, decomplicating the issue is something a lot of people are doing both inside our professions. And believe it or not, some outsiders have as much bandwidth as we do. And I don't mean that they're outsiders in a bad way. They came at their functional truth from a bad narrative, not a scientific background. The thing I like to do is say, listen, if pain brings you to exercise, then we know exercise can undo harm. What does the exercise look like that keeps you from harm? Do we just give correctives to 7th graders as a prophylactic measure? Or do we actually give them an enriching obstacle course that's nothing to do with athletics or the shape of a ball? You're not learning to play sport here. You're learning to move you here. And when I made myself a PE teacher, and I've talked about this a few times, I almost corrected kids with specifics when all they needed was a general movement nutrient. So the only slippery slope I see for all the people who access your interest because of your pain and dysfunction must realize you're designing a diet full of supplements instead of going back and saying, let's find a non-broken human and just keep not breaking them instead of letting them break themselves and correcting them. So corrective strategy is the antidote for dysfunction, but preventing dysfunction may look like a different set of exercises that are simply just functional, but not corrected the way we have to do to get people out of a hole. And so it's a slippery slope, because if I were to ask the people who get huge traffic on the internet, what should I do for 3rd to 7th grade? They'd sell a bunch of equipment and give me a bunch of fixes that look a lot like my original body of work, chops and lifts, and we're going to teach kids to kettlebell swing. No. Climb a tree and jump out of it and don't break nothing. That's pretty good right there. That I can make that a semester. So yeah. Physical obstacles for the sheer playful pleasure of exploration are something that you could easily do for kids. And if you movement screen them at the end of the year, they'll be just fine. So there is a point where I think screening, setting a baseline is good to reclaim movement. But I honestly think that if we do too much of that, we'll think that's the only way movement can be made. And we never made movement. Something way bigger than us made movement. And it already showed us how it likes to upload, upgrade, adapt, and grow and change. So as much as I love corrective strategy, you'll notice I've put up on YouTube these mobility flows. They get better quicker if you do them a little and walk a lot, or do them a lot and walk a little. My point is, walking just said, I'll keep you mobile or stable or functional if you'll get awareness of what you can't do the minimum work, and keep revisiting. Those flows are self-movement screens. You can just revisit them every Thursday and know if you need to revisit them on Tuesday too, or you can do away with them, but I can do that anytime it comes around. So there's a lot of people that have arrived on the internet as movement experts without a scientific movement background, but I don't necessarily vilify them. You just can't be irresponsible in the pain conversation, because for every 80% that you serve with your advice and your corrective strategy, 20% you just complicated their life. And I got to face that 20% in a clinical environment. Sometimes you don't have to face your mistakes on the internet. People just move to another site. But I like to preload the conversation. If this isn't working, it still can work, but not in a general consumption food rules way. We've got to get specific with you, but believe it or not, that's your next best journey. And if you meet a good professional, I think this will happen quickly for you. And so the next thing I think we do with our internet access to people with problems and movement is to create this network of noble participation. I will take a referral, but I'll put you right back in the stream as quick as possible. I'm not going to try to cannibalize the referral and make you a patient for life. I don't think we should do that, but it's the knee-jerk reaction when your business is built too much on the internet or too much on the face-to-face. No, it's built on your progress and whatever it takes to get you there.
It's also interesting as well, like going full circle and seeing how it is. So like when I've done all the FMS courses, right? And you do everything. So when I go back to when I first started, I wanted to FMS everybody and do everything from the functional capacity screen to like the movement stuff to like the breathe, everything all in one go. And it used to scare a lot of people off. But what the thing with that as well is that I've learned over the years is to stage it out. Like, use the corrective algorithm that you guys have to go, you know what, let's see where we're at. Now, the movement stuff, you screen all in one go, like that's get it. But when it comes to the strength stuff, like the functional capacity screen, stuff like that, well, the thing that I remember most of from that course specifically is like, and we do it to this day, can you hang from a bar for 60 seconds? People around the world can do that. They can find a tree, they can find a monkey bar, they can find something to hang from super easy to test their basic grip. So we make sure that they can do that first before they do the actual 75% body weight carry. So we have these staging effects now to get people to where we want to get to. And do they have basic strength? Can they hold a plank for a couple of minutes? Can they do all these things before we get them to do like the bounding and those sort of like dynamic movements after that too? But own the movement first. Can we correct that in it simply? Then we layer the other stuff on top of it afterwards, rather than just put it all together in one, which I used to do back in the day. But now as I hopefully get older and wiser, you start to stage things out and realize that all these things work together. But sometimes you just hold back on some of them before they open that door to the next level, if that makes sense. That whole gamification thing, that secretly open these things moving forward.
Lee did that with me a few years back because he's the educator, I'm the philosopher. I hate answering questions, especially ones I already answered. You just didn't hear me answer it. But by doing all the tests in one, I already know where we're going. You ask all the questions you want, I got all the answers. But Lee, as an educator, realizes both for professionals and consumers, unpacking the message looks like gamification or looks like staging, meaning why would I collect information that's not necessarily vital today? Well, I want to argue the case. So I want the extra information because that's going to change too. But to Lee's point, the next step you need to make has already been vetted and we already know what it is. We could collect more data. It ain't going to change the suggestion. And so me wanting to argue, I wanted all the data in front of me. That's not ideal for some people and it's not practical for some people. But I can get a bunch of good advice from a 10-minute screen or a fly by your site, and I got a month's worth of work before I need to retest anything.
Well, I think Greg, it goes back to what kind of coming full circle and summarize a little bit here. It's you need to make a decision. The person that you're working with, James, wants to fix what they want to fix. They want to know, what do I need to do to lose my weight or achieve my goal? The quicker you can get to what that's going to help them, and creating the two things I think the takeaway is creating that awareness in them, letting them understand that they know, whether it's a self-assessment, which I fully believe now that self-assessments are key, that they get the buy-in, and then showing them how simple it can be to start down the right path. The rule of sevens is unbelievable. It's simple. It's simple, and everybody can appreciate it. And if they can start seeing some results quick, then they're going to be eager beavers wanting to know what's next. And then you can take them through another test or assessment or whatever to find that next kind of hurdle for them to go over. But it's that simple. It is, and we don't have to overcomplicate it. I think giving some people some self-awareness, giving them some solutions on how to take these little bites. It's the elephant. We just got to start taking these small bites.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the podcast with James Breese. I'm a big fan simply because this guy has been everywhere we are. He's been in pain, he's been dysfunctional, and he climbed out of his own hole through his education. He used a lot of our education to get there, and you can click on the links below to follow some of those paths. But I think some of the ways that he summarizes and uses our tools are just as unique. So lean in and keep listening.
That's exactly right. So go back to the alpha. Let's just talk about the nutrition side of things. So as soon as the way we try to sell it to the client, because you've got to always sell it to the clients, other patients to buy into what you're doing. So I say to them, look guys, particularly the sleep side of things. And people come back to us, say they're sleeping 5.5 hours a night, but they want a nutrition plan because every other trainer and coach gives them a nutrition plan. And you say to them, no, I'm not going to give you that. And here's why. Because if you're sleeping less than 7 hours a night and you're like this and you haven't got consistent sleep patterns, you're going to eat between 300 to 500 calories extra a night. So we're swimming against the tide. You're always going to struggle. Most of the time they buy into that because I didn't know that. I said, yeah, here you go. Here's a load of data. Here's a couple of articles. Go and read this. You can find out more about it here. You can send them to the data and the research. It starts that conversation. It's that little bite at the time to be like, okay, cool. And then they start to buy into it. So it's all, again, it comes back to education. Lee's the educator, Gray's the philosopher here. It comes back to education. You've got to educate people as much as you can, even when it's as simple as walk more, drink more water, and sleep more. You've got to educate them. And it's fascinating what people come back to as well. There was, I can give you two specific incidences. One is quite sad, but the other is massive eye opener. So we figured out that there was a lady who said she was having 21 glasses of water a day. We're like, really? 21 glasses of water a day? No, she confused diet soda with water. She genuinely thought that diet soda was water. Now, unpack this a little bit more. What we actually uncovered was she was actually getting emotionally abused by her husband, and every time it happened, she'd reach for a can of diet soda, not diet soda, full fat soda, because she thought that was the right thing to do when she's struggling to lose weight. So it was wow, that just unpacked the whole world of it. She didn't need us. She needed to go and see a therapist and a counselor, which we did pass her on. But it was the fact that we uncovered that idea of she's confusing full fat soda, Coke, with water, and it's happened time after time again. People assume coffee. They're having 12, 13 cups of coffee a day to get through it. So you flip it, and it's just that again, holding that mirror in front of their face, and they go, oh no, I didn't even know I was doing that. It's little things like that set the conversation, and that you take those little chunks. It's like habit stacking, James Clear, Atomic Habits, similar sort of thing. Little bit by little bit by little bit, a 1% difference adds up. And so when you come to the movement screens, and no, you do the movement screens early, but when you come to the correctives, we're already ahead of the curve. That's the key for us and what you guys do, particularly the breathing side of things. That top of the breathing and balance, top of the food chain for us. You get those two things in place, everything else seems to start to self-correct further down here. And then, you guys, active straight leg raise, shoulder mobility. We can go down the whole list, right? It just has a knock-on effect.
Well, I love matching your worst breathing scenario with your worst movement scenario, and sort of frictioning those things together, because a lot of stuff comes. So if you have mobility problems, there's only two different ways we can breathe to get through that. And that's, inhale during extension or flexion movements. But syncing your breath with your spinal movement is a tuning fork that a lot of people miss out on, but it's everywhere. It's in martial arts. And by the way, shout out to Indian clubs. Tell Lee really quick before we end this thing up about your mom at Indian clubs. But what I wanted to say is this thing we're talking about, symmio, is simply another FMS tool, a generation far beyond the FMS, where we've got a little filter that catches stuff that turned out to be risk factors that if we don't manage them, they will become diagnoses and problems and limiting factors that will have maybe irreversible context. But if we can use risk factors really early, we can prevent. And if we can adopt better programming, we can avoid. So prevention is good. Avoidance is way better. And I want our model not just to build prevention, but I would like for people to look at some of the standards we set and said, never let your students, your soldiers, your athletes flunk this test, but you don't have to do our correctives. Just create a better movement meal. So symmio is a tool. If we don't put everything behind it, and if Lee and I don't hand off this symmio Intel chip and say, I want to wrap James Breese's brain around this, or I want to wrap Brett Jones's brain around this, or I want to Kelly Starrett's wrap his brain around it. So the baseline's the baseline, the stopwatch, the stopwatch. There's a lot of different speed coaches out there, but I honestly think if we can come together on those baseline vitals, these risk factors, these non-negotiables, the creativity, the innovation, the access, and the on-ramp, that's why we eat at different restaurants, right?
So, James, what's the Indian club story?
Indian club story. So, so just quickly on the symmio side of things, what we love about it so much is that you get a new client. Let's say we get a performance client in, right? We FMS them straight away. Cool, we get the results. But we know they're all good in most of these places. So what we do is every, say, 4, 5, 6 months, we do a check-in. So guess what we do to check in with people? The stuff on symmio. You with me? Because that's so much quicker. They can do it on their own at home in their own time. So this is how I see it balancing and pairing up with each other. So you have a useful idea of using both. They both are tools, and you can use them at the right time. So if someone's passed the FMS, great. That's amazing. They're twos across the board. We can improve whatever you want to do. But the fact we can go back to them, because some guys hate reassessing, right? That's what we've also discovered. They hate reassessing. So we give them a little mini version. That's where the symmio side of thing comes into it. It's a big part of it. But back to the Indian clubs really quickly. So when we were selling Indian clubs and stuff around the world, we had Ed Thomas's old Indian clubs DVD and his book that we had, right? So we had. It's I thought it sold out completely. I literally thought we'd got rid of them all. We weren't selling manufacturing equipment and weren't doing DVDs and books anymore. And I came home one day and I saw my mum, literally my mother, who's 60, middle of 60s, doing all these Indian club movements. And I was like, Mum, what are you doing? She goes, I've been doing this. I do this every day. What do you do every day? How long for? 6 years, right? She had picked up the Indian clubs, watched the DVDs on her own. She's an exercise. She's not someone into it. She loves her gardening. She loves going for a walk. There's all these little things this here. But for whatever reason, the Indian clubs stuck to her, and she loved them. And she's the idea of them. So literally, she was doing all these rotations, doing all these different things, and all from the DVD. And every day for 10 minutes, she does Indian clubs just to keep it going. And I only found out a couple of years ago during lockdown, during the whole pandemic, that was going on when I was actually back home for a few days with her. It's crazy. It's literally, it's so funny what you see and realize about things and people. But the Indian clubs, my mum loves. So shout, mum says hi, probably, by the way.
Well, no, when you and I had that conversation, you told me that. I told you, it's I'm going to be doing Indian clubs the rest of my life because I got ADHD and they make it better. Yeah. It's crossing those hemispheres, those circular patterns. I don't know what it is, but I know it makes me think, organize, and breathe better after I do it. And I'm not doing it for workout purposes. I do it to prime. And we talked about that. And when you find that little exercise thing that you're prime, I don't need to metric it. I know when I got my minimum effective dose.
Keep it simple. We figure it out.
God bless her, man.
But that's the funny thing, though. My mum has ADHD too. That is a problem. She is squirrels, like literally off and different things all the time. So her words were, she didn't attribute it to the ADHD. She put it down to like this idea of calmness and like this idea of like, I'm resetting and rebalancing essentially. That's
rhythm is speed. So some things that look fast make us calm, I guess. So.
Exactly. I'll take a photo and literally next time I go home with my mum or a video of my mum doing it and send it to you, Gray. I think it'd be quite funny to see it.
Please do. She probably has better technique than me, so I can learn something from.
Well, listen, Jay, this has been great, man. It's a ton of information, and I love your approach. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really think we got some great information here, and a lot of practical information people can take away from this conversation. I think they can use right away. So thank you so much for joining us, man. I appreciate it.
We are truly honored and proud. Thank you for what you've done.
Honestly, guys, it's thanks to you guys. The reason I'm here today is thanks to you guys. So like, I'm very humbled and honored to be on the podcast with you guys. And it's quite funny. It's like two of my mentors essentially from around the world who invited me on the podcast. So I really appreciate it. So, but like I said, it's just a way of like, for my simple brain to keep things simple and to make sure there's checks every step of the way and like applying like I said, taking the FMS system and applying it practically from wherever I can for all these different things. So it's hats off to you guys to create the system and changing the way we move.
Well, thanks for what you're adding.
Thanks, James. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
That will do it for this episode of the Movement Podcast.
Thanks for listening. And if you liked what you heard, please take a minute and subscribe and review.
If you want to learn more about our system and take the next step in your own movement journey,
visit us at movementpod.com.
Until next time, be sure to first move well,
then move often.